Yo, what is up everyone? Today we'll be doing what if Ichigo became a shinigami earlier or accepted Zangetsu early. Pretty much guys, this what if we're gonna be having Ichigo, I guess, meet Zangetsu like really young, like at a young age. Like Broski will, like it's like literally minutes after the Grand Fisher attacks him, pretty much. Like when he's 9. And then I'm gonna go from there, have him, I guess, achieve most of his powers at a reasonable pace, and yeah, that'll pretty much be it. But without further ado, guys, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Bring that heat, boy.
Alright, so we start this what if on the day that Misaki Kurosaki and her son were coming from the karate practice. And pretty much what would happen is Grand Fisher would use his bait to see a little girl who was about to jump in the river, which would obviously cause Ichigo to run towards her to save her, at least. Obviously, this being bait, Grand Fisher would go to sense the amounts of reishi coming out of Ichigo's body as he would go to swipe his hand at Ichigo. But suddenly, obviously, Misaki would jump in the way, trying to use her blood fiend. And some coincidence would happen where Yuha just wanted to have that feeling to want to use the Ashwaulen. So he used the Ashwaulen, and Misaki couldn't use her blood fiend, so she was just a body shield. But something would spur in Ichigo's Ryatsu. Suddenly, blue marks would form on his body as he had unconsciously used blood fiend. Suddenly, I guess just as a way to defend his body. Obviously, he wouldn't really need to, as he would open his eyes and realize he wasn't in danger, as he would look down at his arms as the marks were still there, but it would slowly dissipate, and so would his consciousness, as he would obviously kind of sleep. not even sleep, but like he would just be out like a light, and pretty much he would suddenly wake up in a skyscraper landscape. He was on the side of a building as he looked around, as he looked down, and he started to think to himself, well, how am I standing on the side of the building? As suddenly a voice would answer him, saying, you can always do it whenever you want to. As Ichigo looked over to the voice, and being a person, as he had saw a young man, being obviously the young Yuha, being Tensa Zangetsu. And the reason why Tensa Zangetsu is there is because Ichigo is young, and let's say he sort of like Tensa Zangetsu grows up with Ichigo in a sense. So whenever Ichigo's 15, that should morph into the old man Zangetsu that we all know and love. But pretty much what would happen is Ichigo would question the man, saying, where am I? As the man looked weird. He had a horn on the right side of his face, or the left side, forgive me, and his hair was bleached out, so was his clothes, and the sword that was in his sash was also bleached. As he would question the man, why are your features inverted in color? As the man would question him back, saying, how do you know if I was originally a different color? Just say I had inverted colors. As Ichigo would just respond saying, I just got a feeling. As Zangetsu would answer saying, yes, this feeling is your soul. I am your Zanpakuto. Do you know what a Zanpakuto is, young Kurosaki? As Ichigo would respond saying, no, I don't. What is a Zanpakuto? As obviously him being still 9 years old, he wouldn't really know what a Zanpakuto is, and he was having a lot of time even trying to have a normal conversation with this man, because he was using some adult words that he hadn't learned yet. So, but for some reason he actually felt pretty comfortable around him, obviously this being his other half, his soul, I guess you can say, made sense. As obviously Ichigo would start to learn what a Zanpakuto is and how you should wield the Zanpakuto. I guess with sort of like the Bushido code, as this will start the first time when Zangetsu or Tensa Zangetsu tells Ichigo about the quote. Look forward, Ichigo. Don't look back. If you look back, you age. If you stop, you'll die. So keep going. Never waver. As he would say that same thing, as Ichigo would sort of awaken his Zanpakuto, but not really on the outside world, just in his inner world, because it'd be weird if Ichigo just exploded with Ryatsu and then just swung down to Getsuga. No, it wouldn't make sense. So Ichigo's sword would transform into the blade of his Bankai. Obviously, it wouldn't actually be his Bankai, it would just be the katana itself. Think of it as the sealed form. As Ichigo would start to train with Tensa Zangetsu, he would start clashing sword to sword, as this would start the training of Ichigo Kurosaki. We now do a time skip to the day of Masaki's funeral, which had taken place a few weeks later. Ichigo was looking at the grave as suddenly he was approached by someone, this being Uryu Ishida. Uryu had questioned him on if he was related to Masaki, as Uryu would then ask this Ichigo, as Ichigo would then say, yeah, she was my mom. What about you? As Uryu would then say, well, that means we're cousins. As Ichigo would then be like, that's cool. You trying to train after this? I assume you're Quincy, right? As Uryu would nod his head, but a little surprised nonetheless. As they would head over, what Uryu would show Ichigo his grandfather, introduce him to his grandfather. As obviously Uryu would then tell Ichigo not to tell anyone about their training that's gonna take place, as Ichigo would agree. So Ichigo would walk in as Uryu's grandfather. Did I say uncle? I meant to say if I said uncle, I meant to say grandfather. I keep making that mistake, but pretty much Ichigo would walk in as he would be introduced to Uryu's grandfather. I mean, yeah, that didn't make sense. Uryu's grandfather. As then they would start to train. But once he was given the tips on how to form an arrow, it just didn't work. It just wasn't in him. As Uryu's grandfather starts to get a little curious, as he then told Ichigo to form a sword out of your reishi. As Ichigo would reach out his hand, as he would think of Zangetsu and try to form it. Suddenly he would think of the image, the picture of the sword in his hand, as suddenly the blade of Tensa Zangetsu would form into his hand with the chain and the bleached out sword. As even for a second, not even a second, but just his left eye would bleach, or not bleach, but it would turn into that of Hollified eye, being, kind of blue, but then the rest of it's black. Kind of ironic toward, because Zangetsu sort of has whenever Ichigo uses his mask, it's usually yellow, not blue, but this time it's gonna be blue. Uryu and Uryu's grandfather seeing Ichigo's sword and his Hollified eye would be kind of confused, but nonetheless, Uryu's grandfather remembers the fact that Ichigo's father is a shinigami and his mother is a Quincy and then hollow inside of him, so it was simply a part of him, and it didn't seem to be too troubling. So he would start to train Ichigo on what little techniques he knows of hollows, and then he would then take, Ichigo to Urahara's the next day. Urahara's Shoten to be more precise. So Uryu and Uryu's grandfather would start to teach Ichigo on possible techniques, as Uryu's grandfather had remembered hollows can use zeros. He had then walked up to Ichigo. He told him to point his finger out or use anything he felt like using in his body parts. That sounded sus. But just point at his finger. Once Ichigo would do this, pretty much his grandfather, Uryu's grandfather, would tell Ichigo to charge reishi in your finger with just into a small ball of reishi. As Ichigo would start to do this, a small steroid would start to form, but suddenly it would blow up in his face. As Ichigo's, obviously it wouldn't really hurt him because he had unintentionally used Hieru and obviously Blood Vein. I know you can't really use these techniques because Quincy's hollows are poisonous to Quincy's, but these are like techniques. They're not exactly like blood and blood mixing together. So pretty much the next day, Ichigo would then be taken to Urahara's Shoten by Uryu and his grandfather, where Uryu's grandfather would drop him off, and Uryu and Ichigo would start training with Urahara and Tessai and Yoruichi. Yoruichi had just came back from one of her long trips. She loved to travel a lot for some reason, due to her permanent, quote-unquote, permanent stay in the world of living. She had to adapt some way. So, obviously, this will lead to training. Urahara would train Ichigo on how to use his Zanpakuto much better, and he would teach Ichigo on how to materialize his Zanpakuto. Think about it. If Ichigo were to constantly train with Tensa Zangetsu in the real world, he'd be able to control his Ryatsu much better, learn more Zanjutsu, and possibly become closer and closer to getting Bankai. I mean, that's not what Ichigo wanted. I mean, not the Bankai specific, but he just wanted to get stronger. Enough power to protect the people he held close to him. So, when it came to Uryu was a special case. Urahara had never actually taught any Quincy specifically, and this one was gonna be his first time. Oh, that sounded weird too, but pretty much now he was gonna train Uryu, and what he did is he had Uryu use the Senrai glove, and when they were in deep sparring, pretty much he wanted Uryu to use the Senrai glove, as he even went to a Shikai for this, as Uryu's Ryatsu had exploded exponentially, as he wanted Uryu to use the Senrai glove so he can then move on to the Volsta again, which his grandfather, or Uryu's grandfather, had told him about, and he had done countless research on when he was in the world of living, just doing research on the air itself, since Reishi is in the air. Obviously not as much as, Soul Society, but there's some in the air. As he would start to teach Uryu on how to use a Senrai glove, and then he would release it, then he would lose his Quincy powers, quote unquote. He would then get it back, then he would unlock his Volstick. I'll bet it's not as strong as his canonical version. The version where he got it after the Soul Society arc. He needs to master a bit. He's only fucking 9 years old. Like, calm down. As then Ichigo. Now Ichigo, he had started to get into the hollow buildings. This is where he goes over to the Vizards. Now, Ichigo's a special case. His hollow wasn't constantly trying to take over, so this time Ichigo's mask is not really a mask. It's simply the Horn of Salvation. As you know, when Ichigo accepted himself, he had gained the Horn of Salvation. But this Horn of Salvation will look more similar to that of Tensa Zangetsu. And he would start to use more techniques, being able to charge Zero from that point of the horn, and then he'd be able to use Pesquisa, Hieru, high-speed regeneration, and other small techniques, also being able to open Gargantas. As what would occur is they would just be training without the knowledge of his father or any of his family members. So anytime Ichigo had gone missing, it was simply because he was he was grieving, or was saddened, or was being a delinquent by the riverbank or any other place that held memory to him, as all his family had grown used to it. Now Ichigo was training, and he was quite excited about it. And now his Shahakusho changed majorly. He hasn't really technically gone into Shinigami form, but now he will. As we now do a time skip to the day of April 1st, the first episode of the anime. Ichigo was walking back from school, as this time he was more wiser and more intelligent. As he had walked by the girl, the same soul he had met, this was the day. He had finally been training for years, and now he was going to start his Shinigami duties. He was supposed to go out hollow hunting with his friend Uryu later tonight, and also with another Vizard, Shinji. Even though Shinji was a captain's level, or captain rank, or at least used to, he wanted to teach Ichigo on how to properly be a shinigami, feeling it was necessary since Ichigo was the one who could defeat Aizen, or possibly. Only time could tell. As Ichigo walked by the soul, he had summoned his Zanpakuto, as he had then consoled it. He had to focus a little bit due to the fact that he is part Quincy. He didn't want to erase it from existence, or he didn't want to absorb it like with his hollow part, so he had to focus a bit. As he had then consoled the girl, she was then sent to the Soul Society to find her other family members. As Ichigo went about his day. Ichigo went about his day. As he had went home, he would head home where he would walk in. He was suddenly, he would feel his senses going off, or his pesquisa, as he then sensed a attack coming for him. Ichigo would immediately look to his right as he would sense Ishin's attack coming right for him. Ichigo would then dive backwards or bend backwards as his kick would barely miss his face, as Ichigo would then grab him by the face before then slamming him into the wall. As Ichigo would then comment about his sneaky tactics, saying, "You almost got me, old man, but that's not good enough." As Ishin would then say, "Man, Ichigo, it's been 6 years since you actually got hit by my attacks. Quite the improvement, boy." As obviously Ichigo would then just take his dinner upstairs, as he'd be sitting in his room pondering, as he was thinking to himself if he was ready to do his duties as a shinigami, as he had looked at the clock. Shinji and Uryu should be here in a few minutes, and he needed to get ready. He had finished up his food and change into a shinigami form, as he had used but sort of like an invention made by Urahara, but mostly himself. Sort of an organic way of changing into his shinigami form. As he would immediately change into shinigami form, there would be no thing of his body falling backwards or anything, no. He had simply just went into the form. There was no need of a Gigai or soul pill or anything like that. He had just went to, into a shahakusho. This shahakusho looking sort of like his Bankai's clothing being bleached out, but also similar to his Vastalorde clothing and the hoodie and the horn. He was sort of ready. Once he had jumped out of his window, his father was watching from afar. He was looking down at Ichigo as he was impressed at his recent evolution, but he was kind of concerned. He looked more like that hollow white that had infected Masaki 20 years ago. But that didn't really matter now. Ichigo seemed to be a better user of that power, as he had seen Ichigo walk off into the distance with his blade on his shoulder. As Ichigo would head over to the park, he would meet up with Shinji and Uryu as they were ready. Suddenly they'd, feel the presence come upon them. Not a strong presence, but just a normal presence of a hollow. As Ichigo, Uryu, and Shinji would look to the right, as they would see Fishbone D. It was terrorizing the city earlier this day, and Ichigo had witnessed him. If only he could have went to Shinigami form, but he was told by Urahara not to, telling him that he hasn't came up with the invention to suppress his Ryatsu from being sensed by Soul Society yet, but now he can do as he pleases. As now Ichigo looked at Fishbone D, all the terror he had caused, he can now do something about it. He then appeared in front of the hollow as he had slashed down. A wave of Getsuga escaped from his blade, as the hollow would then be sliced in half. After this, Ichigo would start slaughtering through the other hollows, cleansing them, or sending them to hell depending on the sins that the hollow had committed in its afterlife. In its previous life. As this would mark the day of Ichigo's cleansing, as right before the day would end, they would bump into Rukia, as suddenly, for some reason, a Menos would form, this being a Gillian. Now Rukia was doing quite okay. She was in her Shikai, using her Shikai abilities being Tsukishiro and Hakuren, and she was not doing too bad. but suddenly she had gotten hit on her chest area as Ichigo and Uryu and Shinji had just pulled up to the scene, with Ichigo telling them that he'll deal with it. As Ichigo would walk onto the scene, as he was about to be stomped on by Gillian, Ichigo would then suddenly just keep walking, as suddenly the foot of the Gillian would just be split in half as Ichigo would casually walk right through it, as the two parts of his foot would just barely miss Ichigo. It would be kind of a menacing walk. As the Menos would sense Ichigo's presence, it would almost fold under it, as the Menos would for some reason get on his knees and almost start bowing to Ichigo due to the amount of pressure that was exerting off of his body. Though the Gillian didn't have much senses or feelings or emotion, he had felt one thing. This person had the same Ryatsu or similar Ryatsu to that of Baragon or Sosuke Aizen, as he almost felt pressured, as he had felt dominated by the pressure, so he had gone onto his knees as Ichigo had walked up to him, as he had then slashed him in half, cleansing the Gillian as he would then absorb the power. Ichigo's body would then glow, as then it would suddenly, the light would then diminish, as he had now absorbed the hollow. After he had done this, he had walked up to Rukia and questioned if she was okay, in which she would respond, nodding her head, saying that she was just fine. As Ichigo wouldn't ask her name, as she would then say Rukia Kuchi, as she would ask for his name, in which she would then say Kurosaki Ichigo. As then they would start to talk, obviously with Uryu and Shinji too, in which Rukia would realize that Ichigo was part Quincy, Hollow, and Shinigami, something she had not even seen since even the start of Soul Society, as she had realized who Ichigo was possibly related to. She would then remember a tale of the 5 great noble heads. She had then remembered a rumor, slight rumor, but nobody believed it. She would then explain to Ichigo how the Soul Society came to be a thing. There was something called the Soul King. Soul King was strong, it was menacing, it had slaughtered every hollow, but the thing is, it destroyed the hollow. It didn't cleanse it, it didn't return it back to its original form or human state. So the 5 great noble heads had to seal it. Obviously, she would explain that Suneichiro had feared its power and wanted to take it, or maim it, to make sure it had never escaped from the seal, as they sealed Soul King, and the Soul King for some reason posed no resistance. And there was 5 people who spawned with the Soul King, being the Zero Division. Obviously not all 5, but sort of just Ichibei and Owatsu. Then obviously Kurenji and Senjumaru and Hikafune would then join later. But she would then explain that Soul King was a hybrid of all beings. He created all the races, as now Ichigo was a hybrid of all those races. That means he has power on par with the Soul King. As Ichigo would kind of be surprised at this, as suddenly they'd be interrupted by a voice. Uruhara would then speak up saying, "Oh, so you know him? You know that thing? The Linchpin?" As Rukia would then say, "Yes, but I thought this was all a rumor, a fantasy." As Uruhara would then explain, saying, "No, Soul King is quite a living being, not living but not living at the same time. He is a linchpin to the universes and the macrocosm, and he's the thing that holds us together." As he would then point to Ichigo, saying that he was possibly the next successor to being the Soul King, though without being all sealed and things like that. So Ichigo would kind of feel a little proud, but then he would feel the responsibilities, as he had remembered a quote from a movie he had watched in the States: with great power comes great responsibility. So he was thinking to himself, this quote would be really useful now. Just kidding, but basically, obviously this would mark the end of the day and the end of this What If. I don't know if I should actually continue this What If, so if you guys really like it, I guess say that you like it. I don't really know what else to say. But pretty much, guys, without further ado, guys, I said guys like 3 times, but I hope you have a good day. But without further ado, peace out.